Well, thank you again, David, for joining us. Your background is very interesting. Your website is fascinating. You are a former software engineer at Microsoft and Google. You helped launch Google Plus there, which was their.
Oh no, I didn't work on
Oh, you
Google
didn't
Plus.
work on. Pardon me, then I misunderstood. But you've done.
No,
You've been deep in this industry. You're a widely published writer and critic. You cover a huge range of topics that range not just in the tech space, but everything from literary criticism to philosophical issues to social issues to tech things as well. You've got a Substack. You've been the author of 2 books. The first was a memoir of your time as a software engineer. The second is the most recent book, Meganets, which I have been reading, and it is, as I say, deeply fascinating. I do hope people who watch this choose to go out and pick up the book, because I think it was insightful, especially since, as you say, you wanted to reorient the conversation. I listened to a lot of people who've criticized things like Facebook under the assumption Facebook could be better, but your chief complaint is they're not in control of any of this. So we're having you on, though, today to talk about AI. And so my first question to you to launch off is, what is a Meganet and how is it germane to understanding what AI is today?
right. Why did I take the trouble to coin a new word? It was because I felt that there was even going back to my time when I was a software engineer at Google, that uh, the persistent sense that we had more control over our systems than we actually did, and that the difference between sort of a traditional computer network and what we're including in AI and what I call a meganet is that a meganet emphasizes both the human and the technological elements working together and feeding back onto each other. That we tend to think of computers as having somewhat fixed algorithms that are administered by programmers and some, elite cast of uh, of software and tech engineers. But in actuality, everybody who uses these networks, the hundreds of millions of people using them, are constantly shaping and altering the algorithms so that you never really step into the same data stream twice. And that amount of impact really does remove control over those networks, not just from tech companies, but from really any kind of serious, detailed oversight. That you're going in and you're telling the network, just through passively experiencing it, what's interesting and what's not. If you hold on some Facebook post, that actually is enough for Facebook to say, that one really caught this person's attention, let's bump it up. And the issue with giving that control to users is that it does take it away from the overall administrators, because the weights of the algorithms, and this includes AIs, just get more and more complicated, and you're forever bolting the door after the barn door after the horse is gone. And so what I emphasize in Meganet is the almost like ecological, like, unpredictability of it, the hugeness of it. And there are 3 qualities, the 3 V's, which I say are volume, the sheer size of it; velocity, which is the speed at which people participate in it and change what's in it; and finally, virality, which is another word for feedback, which is that effectively what's happening on these systems builds on itself constantly. And those 3 characteristics taken together really make these systems far harder to control than software in the traditional sense. And that's why I think it needs its own name. Now, when it comes to AI is very much a meganet, because I should say specifically AI in the sense that we are reading about and experiencing it now, these large language models, because they are seeded on huge amounts of human created data. This data is not, they're trained on it. This data is not created by the tech companies. It's just sourced from the web and from other data stores. So what you're saying is, okay, well, how an AI behaves is now actually a matter of how humanity collectively behaves. And as we know, you can't control how humanity collectively behaves. And, you know, companies like OpenAI with ChatGPT are trying to massage their AIs to behave in acceptable ways. But the idea that you could them on a fine grain in any sort of fine grain way is a fantasy, because you can't control in a fine grain way what you're putting into it. When you have that many petabytes of data going into it, you don't have the time to analyze it and say, yeah, this should go in and this shouldn't. You can broadly exclude categories of data, but if you're going to dump Wikipedia into these AIs, which they do, you don't have the time to look through and say, oh, where was AI, where did Wikipedia's factual error, let's remove Wikipedia's factual errors. We know there are factual errors in there, and we know, and there's no way that they're not getting dumped into there. So that's what I mean in terms of this loss of control that I associate with Meganets, and why I think that we need a specific term for systems that display this kind of loss of control. And AI being, I think, the most vivid example, because I think in some ways the lack of control over it has become more apparent more quickly than with any other technology.
So that raises a couple of things. Like, I have a recollection of, I believe it was Microsoft that launched a chatbot through, might have been Twitter. And I think in 24 hours, the internet being a hyper online group of people, managed to get it spouting Nazi nonsense.
Right, that was yeah.
And this is what you mean in terms of feedback and virality. It's drawing off of what's been fed into it, and the more open it is to the wider internet, the less control the programmers or the people who are meant to be managing it will have. Would that be a fair summation?
It doesn't even necessarily need to be open, because in the case of AI, even if you're not taking new inputs to it, even what it's being trained on is already out of your control. What have you just put into the AI? You've put in this huge database that certainly was sourced from the wider internet. So one could say the less control you have over the sources of the training data, the less control you have over the result. But I would even go further and say that there is a certain point at which the systems, certain types of systems do get complicated enough that even when trained on a more limited set of data, you get unpredictable effects. That, if anything, it's the sheer size that does it. You can make it worse by putting fewer filters on what's coming into it. But the second that you're dealing in more data than you can possibly screen, no matter what the source of that data, you are starting to run that risk that I associate with Meganets.
So 60 Minutes on the weekend, they had an AI, a couple of bits on AI. They were sitting and talking with Google. I think Google's chatbot is called Bard, and they're presenting it. And the journalist is watching it. He's obviously deeply impressed with what he's seeing. And of course, it's producing content very quickly. Google was quick to say, it's not searching the internet. It's reading from an isolated database. But your point would be that database has still been sourced from the internet. So
I mean, if I ask it about a movie, where could it possibly have gotten the information that that if I ask it about Avatar, where would it have gotten that data from? I don't think people inside of Google have been like producing that knowledge, right?
Right.
I'm actually surprised they would make that point.
The other part was they asked it to do an essay on inflation. And very quickly, the AI produced a full, very coherent essay on what inflation is from an economic standpoint, cited 5 books, none of them exist. This is a reoccurring issue, apparently, is hallucinations. And I don't know if you heard this past week or just recently, lawyers try to use Chat GPT to come up with some legal precedences, and those precedences were
Yeah,
also
I wrote a post
manufactured.
about it. Yeah, there's a post on my Substack about that and the implications. Yeah.
So, but why is, obviously from a commercial standpoint, we would like AI to be reliable. I mean,
Right.
there's an issue here I want to get into about control and who has control over the data, which you touch on in your book. But from the standpoint of just AI generally, I mean, do we understand why it's producing faulty data or make believe data
Yeah.
as a byproduct of what it's doing?
Yeah, it doesn't really know. It doesn't have a concept of what's true and what's false. The reason why I don't dislike the word hallucination because I think it's too anthropomorphic. It assumes that there's something different happening when it comes up with something false and with something true, but that's not the case. It's the exact same. It's the exact same process. It's basically figuring out what the most what the best or most likely next sentence or phrase should be based on the prompt and what's gone before. And I mean, given the lack of actual awareness of what it's talking about, the results are really amazing. But I think that what it shows is just how if anything, the danger is that we are so easily convinced that that's something that speaks as human because we've never had something that can speak and generate language this well that isn't actually conscious, that isn't actually thinking. And I don't think that under any real reasonable definition of the term, you can say that these AIs are thinking. In some ways makes them more amazing, but what's happening, yeah, it's just looking and saying like, okay, what's the next best thing to say? And unfortunately, that works a lot better when you're dealing in terms of just like generating grammatical sentences that are taken, if you want to talk about inflation, it's going to mimic the most popular talk about inflation from all the data you fit into it. The problem is when it comes to references, it's funny actually, because sometimes you get good references. And you'd have to dig into it to know the specific circumstances under which a particular AI produces legitimate references versus non-legitimate references. And to some extent, you might be able to control on that to improve it, but you're still fixing it piecemeal. Other problem, if anything, references are going to be easier to fix than simple like factual inaccuracies. I've had ChatGPT claim to me that 5 is not a prime number, and I can't really tell you like. It's because it's not thinking coherently. That's why it can contradict itself so easily. People say, well, people have told me, well, humans contradict themselves as well. But yes, they contradict themselves nonetheless, having some underlying conceptual scheme that they're working within, even if it generates contradictions. There's nothing like that in these LLM AIs. It's just generating text based on what it thinks is the most likely, best, ideal next token sequence. So, and I don't think that's an easy problem to solve, at least for this paradigm. And I think Jan LeCun of Facebook has said the exact same thing. He thinks that in some ways these LLMs are a dead end. You're never going to be able to get it to be accurate because the thing just doesn't have enough of a conception of the world, and it can't actually know whether something is true or false. And well, if you think about this as, okay, this is a machine that literally can't tell the difference between true and false and doesn't know whether what it's saying is true or not, you can see where you might run up against limits with that.
So some of this then obviously runs counter to, I think, the chief hopes of AI, which would be that, this thing can process so much data so quickly that we could turn it loose in problem areas. So Facebook could. So one of the points in your book is something like Facebook. It's not under the control of Zuckerberg. He doesn't have the ability to stamp out hate speech because it's so much. There's so much stuff, and it's all getting feedback, and the algorithm, as you say, is you're never stepping into the same data stream twice. Maybe an AI could come in and fix that for them, but you don't sound hopeful that this will be an applicable use of this technology.
Well, I think AI's role, at least in the short to medium term, is going to be as an assistant. You can use it as a pre-filter. What it can't give you is a guarantee. If I can write, you can certainly write an AI that will catch a good chunk of abuse or hate speech or whatever you want to say that it is. It's when you need it to be, it's when you need sort of like human level accuracy that you're really going to run into trouble. And I think that there was some, it's interesting because for something like facial recognition, AIs are great. But that's because you don't need sort of a greater contextual knowledge for facial recognition. You're saying, okay, here's a picture of a person's face. How close is it to something else? It's when you start getting into the muddy area of things that language is not discrete. You have words rely on other words, behaviors rely on other behaviors, facts rely on other facts. So that's when AI runs into trouble because the only way we currently have to have these AIs learn is by just dumping in examples of what we think is good and bad, and it tries to figure out patterns among them. That approach has been incredibly successful, as we've seen with image recognition, voice recognition, et cetera, et cetera. And it's even been successful in terms of seeing, okay, what's grammatical, what sounds human, what doesn't sound. So it can generate text that sounds very human because it does have a good sense of what is and of what is convincingly human or not. The issue comes when you have things that require some sort of underlying conceptual knowledge, and you're creating beliefs and structures of thought, because that's not happening. And that's why I think the longer you engage in a single conversation with an AI, I think the more the seams show that say things that don't really fit with what went before in ways that humans never would, because it's really just choosing, again, the best token sequences it can find.
So you're describing AI then it's got at least these large language learning systems, which is what we're kind of being. This is the thing that has captured the most attention right now. Extend this into, I mean, people are trying to come up with commercial applications. So two that stand up is one would be in the medical field, where as an assistant, this could be helpful in identifying, I guess helping diagnose or in triage. Another one is in the legal space as well, because of course there's huge tracts of data that, I mean, how are you gonna, no lawyer knows all the precedents, all the case law. Maybe AI can be useful in that. I'm curious, do you think that those seem like viable uses given its current limitations? And then a follow-up to that, if you don't mind touching on it. You've mentioned about the issue of loss of control. From a legal and medical standpoint, a company that stands out here is Thomson Reuters, who have enormous databases of this information that they sell access to. Would they be wise to add an AI to their system, or would they be ultimately turning loose something into a database that they can't really control? Would that be a poor move?
It depends on the standard. When you see Google and Microsoft launch these bots, they're in contexts in which your standard of accuracy isn't especially rigorous. I mean, when you think about it, it's like, well, why would you expect anything more from something trained on Wikipedia than Wikipedia itself? A lawyer would never cite from Wikipedia. And a doctor would never take information from would never take medical information from Wikipedia. That's not to say though that you couldn't have these models trained on more reliable data at which point it becomes, okay, how do you stop it from synthesizing that in ways that produce factually inaccurate content? And I think, yeah, there's definitely a future for it. In some ways, you're looking at just the bar of automation is going up a bit.
Okay.
I've already talked to students who are using it to write papers. Why is this? Because papers are often written on very common and conventional topics, and there's enough out there that it's producing a more or less boilerplate paper that fits the bill. When it comes to case law, you often are delving into more obscure areas, and the chances of it running off the rails increases. The more common the application, the more common the scenario, the more likely it is to actually give you something legitimate. But that's not to say that you could get it to write the sort of the boilerplate for a legal brief and then fill in the gap. So you're still looking at something that could considerably decrease the amount of time needed to produce content, well as at least produce potential references that can be pursued. It turns humans into sort of editors for AIs, and I think that sort of collaboration, same thing as relating to what I say in the book. It's the collaboration between the humans and the machines that actually is going to yield us the most significant changes, not sort of expecting them to be autonomous, because there's certain kinds of reliability that just can't be guaranteed. So yeah, no, I definitely think there's a future for there. I think it's been overstated a bit, but you're already seeing people produce good enough content. So, and if you can do that, and you can identify if a human can identify whether it's good enough, because the AI can't. But if you have a human saying whether it's good enough, then you're able to introduce it. And I do think that we'll see that there in contexts where the facts don't matter as much in terms of creating fictional discourse, or say creating dialogue for friends and companions. I could see that going pretty far, because again, the more boilerplate content is, the more convincing it's going to be. So they were already saying that people have been falling in love with chatbots. There was I forget
that may also cast some doubt on the
company, but when they stopped their chatbots from acting romantically, actually people were really devastated. So yeah.
That's maybe a more worrying and separate issue that comes up in the future.
It's all of a piece, because when you start saying it's hallucinating, you're anthropomorphizing it, and you're going to anthropomorphize it in other ways as well. If you see these things as even if you see them as unreliable and erroneous, but you still see them as thinking and feeling, you're already there. I don't think they are, but I don't think that's going to stop. When we talk to automated bots on the phone right now, they try to act human. And what happens when they become more convincing? Well, there's a huge incentive for that, because you're basically replacing expensive human labor with very, very cheap machine labor.
So there's components here where I can see that there is going to be viable commercial things. But, when I think about, say, a large organization, you've got people working in accounts receivable or what have you. This doesn't sound like it's going to wipe out jobs. I mean, a big concern is that we're going to wipe out a huge percentage of jobs, but this sounds more like I've got to write an email to a lot of people, and the chatbot can do the boilerplate, put an email together to address this issue, and then you add the pertinent data that is the thing that you actually deal in. It doesn't sound like it's not going to be the great, and please correct me if you think I've got this wrong, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be the great white collar job wipeout that the initial
It could be
skepticism
pretty.
is?
It could be pretty bad. I won't estimate, but I don't think it should be underestimated because when you get to things like copywriting,
Okay.
uh, when you get to things like just sort of press releases, there's already been downward pressure in that area. The writing itself has been fairly devalued over the last 10 years, as anyone in the writing fields can tell you. And you know, if you can reduce a staff of 10 writers to one, that's going to make an impact. Even if you can't get rid of the people completely, you can think of it as you can reduce entire departments to one or two people. And I do think we will be seeing that. The exact degree of that effect, I'm not sure, but I there's a lot of jobs like that out there.
Yeah.
That just involve basically what we could say is rote content creation, and a lot of it is that we don't expect more than rote content creation a lot of the time. We grade our kids' essays by computer in standardized tests. So if we can grade them by computer, why there's absolutely no reason why they can't be created by computer.
Okay. So that's interesting. So I did happen to talk to someone who works in the field of marketing, and they said that they did used to have to call up an artist and say, we need, these four, do a concept. We know 4 different versions of it to present to the client.
Right.
Dolly, which I think is the picture version of ChatGPT, basically produces all of that in seconds, right? I mean, it's a very, that kind of work is the kind of work that you think is
Exactly.
most vulnerable to that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I would say that the same goes for text generation as well. You're going to change humans basically being editors that charged with making sure something is good enough, tweaking it, fixing it. But that sort of job is going to take vastly less time, and so yeah, you're looking at a considerable shrinkage and arguably you even need slightly different skills. I don't know. Also, the entire world of customer service. We still, right now, customer service bots are not good enough, and you still, get sent to a call center, most of the time. That will still happen some amount of the time, but as I said, you've already seen pressure there.
Yeah.
And I that's only going to increase because you're going to have more intelligent bots that are actually going to be trained on call center interactions. That's the thing, is that whatever isn't automated, whatever isn't outsourced or whatever to LLMs immediately, well, you're going to start monitoring things you hope to, and if it's mechanistic and repetitive and rote enough, bots will be able to pick it up. So you're also going to see massive sort of accumulation of data in the hopes of improving customer service bots. And again, you won't see the entire field wiped out, but they're going to attempt to minimize the amount of human labor required. And I think it'll be significant. I'm not going to estimate exactly how great it is, but I think you'll see it. Yeah.
One threat is job loss. I have a good friend whose opinion I trust very much. He's terrified of the fake news, almost everything becoming untrustworthy through the internet. Phone calls you won't know you're speaking to your kids because they'll be able to mimic your voice so much. They'll be able to. Is this also a liability going forward?
Yeah, it's not so there's two differences. One is unreliability, and we're already there. You can't trust what you read on the internet already. The other thing, though, is literally something pretending to be what it's not. Specific, and it's pretending to be human, for example. And that is a huge thing. That basically the ability to put words into people's mouths and present convincing imitations of them is going to be a very big deal in a very short amount of time, because the ability to modify, massage, and create content to order. You're not asking it to generate the content. You want it to create a convincing simulacrum of the content you give it. Yeah, that's a big deal. And I think that is definitely going to be something that over the next 10 years, more or less, we're going to see become an increasing problem, that not being able to know whether a given video, and video is probably where you're going to feel this the most, because right now we are still in a position where you see a video and you can assume that it actually is a reflection of reality. That is going to get less, that assumption is going to get shot to hell within the next 10 years, because it's going to become increasingly possible to do it in a seamless way. I have some ideas on how you can mitigate that, but it is a very, very real problem. I think a much greater and much more pressing issue.
I want to come back to how you think you deal with that, because I get the impression that there is no, as you said, that horse is out of the barn, and you do outline some solutions inside your book about dealing with Meganets, but
yeah,
this
that one I
doesn't
didn't
feel
go
like
with.
the same. This doesn't feel like the same kind of problem.
No, and in some ways, it's actually, I think, is more manageable, because you're looking for exclusivity. You want to be able to say, okay, well, how can I at least set aside a certain subset of content as being guaranteed real? And that's actually a more manageable problem, because you basically say to people, okay, look, you don't trust anything unless it has this end-to-end sort of marker of authenticity. And there are various ways you could incorporate that. But if you can set up validation verification mechanisms, the same way that we have site certificates and such on websites, you could at least guarantee it. Well, you could try to guarantee the authenticity of certain content. So especially if you're institutional, it would be not hard for if you can say, and in fact, I am this person, I vouch for this content. And so it can become a reputational system, and it can also be sort of a hardware based. Oh, okay, as soon as this content was guaranteed to have been filmed on a secure camera, and you can guarantee that it hasn't been messed with, because it still has this implanted signature, watermark, whatever you want to do. That is at least manageable. You have to build out infrastructure for it, but I do think that it's more tractable than, say, getting LLMs not to make stuff up.
So a quick, if we take a pause here just to sort of recap where we're at. The AI at the moment, at least as it's structured as this large language model, is probably not super accurate. So the greatest impacts will be felt in creative professions, where a lot of rote, repetitive stuff goes on, and the content only needs to pass effectively a sniff test to meet our needs. Is that a fair summary of how you?
That's part of it, but again, as long as you're having humans acting as editors, I could see it having a significant effect, say, in legal realm, because paralegal work of just putting together the boilerplate for motions and things like that can still be that can still be given to AI. The issue, with the lawyer who submitted the brief of the made up cases, was he didn't even bother to check it. But okay, well, let's say you check it. Let's say, you still have case researchers or things like that. You're still having some pressure, a downward pressure on jobs in which facts do matter. It's just that you can't just hand it to it and forget about it. So you'll see it in more mission critical areas as well, but it will be tempered and muted a bit relative to cases in which you're effectively just generating very, very boilerplate content. And ironically, I guess you could say that includes a lot of news, especially in like entertainment news or things. We already see a lot of computer generated content, and yeah, that will only increase. Yeah, I mean, you could say we've already seen AstroTurf computer generated content, so that's already out there. And the ability to produce that and have it read reasonably fluently is going to increase.
You're making it sound as though there's also maybe not well defined, but there is a limit on what these models can do. Can you just quickly expand on what a large learning model is, just so that we're clear
Yeah.
of how it's different than our popular conception of AI?
Yeah, I mean, a large learning model is a kind of a deep. It's more or less deep learning, one can say. And the idea of deep learning is that you're feeding in huge numbers, huge amounts of training data. And what one in general, simplified, you're feeding it huge amounts of data that in some way is seen to be accurate, correct. And these LLMs, in a fairly complicated and opaque way, somewhat like the human brain, take all that data and find patterns in it, such that you can then ask it, and it will attempt to produce results, answers that, as best it can, match the patterns that you fed into it. But nowhere in here is there any sort of judgment of truth or falseness. If it happens to draw a line between truth and falseness, it doesn't even know that that's what that line is. You know, what you're hoping for, that when you do face recognition, it's the same thing. You're saying, okay, well, this I've carved out a little area, and all the faces that sort of fall into this gigantic, like, infinity dimensional map that the computer has constructed. If they're within this little zone, then they're the same face, and that's how you do facial recognition. Well, you're doing that the same here. Um, it's just that facial recognition. What you're saying is it the same or is it not? That's a pretty clear question. The question is this true or is it not? That's not. Truth is not an easy concept in the way that sameness of sensory data is, and that's where it breaks down. I don't know if that answers your question,
I think it does. I think because where I want to go next is one of the concerns that we have is a financial person.
yeah,
When there has been a lot of hype around Bitcoin, which I don't love. I mean, bubbles are reemerging in the market, and the AI just seemed to turn up again as a market focused thing that just as just as the cryptocurrency one seemed to
right.
be winding down, and now we've got hype building, but the concept about what we're doing is unclear. The business implementation of this is unclear. If
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to, as a if I'm trying to guess where I think I can get the most bang for my buck, how do I capitalize on this change? Because it is a change. You've outlined, I
Right.
think, some terrific ways that this is going to make a difference in who's employed, how businesses might save money employing it. But the companies that are going to benefit from it the most right now, who would you think that they are?
Oh, that's a good question. And by the way, I don't think that cryptocurrency itself is gone. I think there was a bubble, but I think the underlying concepts are already trying to, the big banks are trying to incorporate them in various ways. So, just because I think uh, these technologies emerge and hype gets built up around them only to collapse, but the underlying technology of these AIs has been with us, well, at least since the 80s, arguably since the 60s. And nobody thought you could do anything with it. There were bubbles around it. There have been many AI bubbles, and it goes through phases. Right now, I think the biggest, well, certainly in terms of much lower cost content creation with regard to I guess specified content. You're going to be able to make, movies, videos, create, imaginary idols with much less overhead because you don't need people to do it anymore. So I think when you're looking at the creation of content that, I don't know what you would call that, is cosmetic in one way or another. Maybe that's the way to put it, where the appearance of it is the most important thing, whether it's creating a virtual pop idol or writing a press release. that's where you probably have that's where you have the most ability for the LLM specifically to do it. More generally, I think both the comprehension and the generation of just what we think of as analog data is going to get increasingly better. Let's say, yeah, I don't know, you want to make a movie with Humphrey Bogart in it, you're going to be able to do that. You know, you want to you want to what was the example I was just thinking of? You want to create an outline for a potential character, write an outline for a script, a movie script. That you're getting to the point where these AIs will be able to do that, or at least will be able to help a tremendous amount. So that again, we're becoming more editors than creators. You want it to create music. You want it to create pop music. Some of this will be, again, some of it will explicitly be used. I think that people will be saying, okay, now I'm working in collaboration with an AI. You know, it's doing something and then I'm tweaking it, I'm feeding this into it, you know. This technology will get incorporated to it. Some of it will be automated as well. So I think what you want to look at is what are the areas in which you are least dependent on, I guess, what you think of as truth. And what are the areas in which you can, in which you are, I guess, doing or making decisions that rely on a fairly contained number of inputs and rely on somewhat fuzzy human judgment. It doesn't have to be exact, but that it's a very well-defined problem. You know, figure out the best way to route to route jobs within a company, to figure out the best way, optimization tasks and things like that. These are all things that I think that AI can be deployed on and is going to do increasingly well. The more contained you can make a task, the better you can do it. The less you're reliant on truth, the better off you are doing it. The irony, I think, is that ChatGPT, I think, shows its weaknesses more readily because they deployed it and said, "Oh, it can talk about anything." And well, you have that wide a remit for it, you're definitely going to find problems, and you basically set yourself up for failure because there's no way you can possibly constrain it to something you can actually like check and validate within any more contained problem domain. I think you can do much better.
So that would tell me though that the companies that are going to do the best in this are going to be already the existing tech companies that have the biggest leverage in the space. So Microsoft is going to do well. Google's probably going to do well because they'll be the ones producing the AIs, or they'll have the best AIs, which I presume will be the kind of thing that we're looking for here to use, and that people.
Well, you're going to get more. I think you're going to get more off sort of bespoke AIs or off the shelf solutions where you're not using the AI. There's going to be an explosion of them. It's not going to be everybody, because it's very easy to clone these things. It's only going to get easier as we have more and more processing power. So a company will get an AI and it'll be tailored to produce the sort of content that they want it to. There's no reason for a company writing press releases about new solvents to have Wikipedia dumped into it. You want it more restricted. And in fact, doing those sorts of restrictions, of course, is going to make it more reliable. So there's probably going to be an upsurge in jobs for people who are better at training or constraining or customizing AIs that are either sold by, it's solutions solutions format by tech companies, or that can be assembled from increasing open source models that are being sold. So you're going to see that both of those. I think you can look at it in as a new kind of B2B solutions field, in much the same way that that Siemens or whoever has been providing their solutions for accounting and much more prosaic tasks. I think that that's what you're going to see. That you're going to need some sort of consultancy around it in a lot of cases, because it's going to be, for a particular problem, it's going to be possible to do better than you would if you just fed it into ChatGPT. And actually, law would be a great example. If you were to train an LLM on high quality legal material, and at the same time put in certain guardrails to minimize the sort of generation of false case data, you could do way better than ChatGPT is doing there without necessarily an advance in the technology. Is it going to be perfect? No, you're absolutely going to need to edit it. But is it going to be better than ChatGPT? Absolutely.
Okay. We're getting close to the end here. I'm just going to offer any questions. If you are one of the people who is watching and you would like to hit the Q&A button and send a question, we will put it to David. But while we wait for that and see if anyone does want to ask anything, final thing, Terminator style, end of days, seems unlikely, but is there any reason why this AI, I mean, the level of hype around this reaches concerns that the AI is going to wipe us all out. I think there was it's called Sydney. I think it was an Australian journalist sat down and was blown away. He was shaken by what what the bot had said to him.
Yeah.
Anything about that before we go?
No, I wrote about that too. No, I mean, if you prime it with, if you're an AI, what scary things would you do? It will give you back the collective nightmares of humanity. If you prime it with, sunshine and lollipops, it'll talk about how to achieve utopia. It doesn't think any of these things. I mean, I'm not willing to say there's no existential risk from AI. I think there's no existential risk from these AIs, and I think that it's a long ways off. But no. I mean that again, that it's a projection. It produced exactly the collective nightmares of humanity that we fed into it. It doesn't think any of those things. You can get it to have a nervous breakdown if you prompt it to. You can engineer it to do whatever you want.
We have a question. It's governments are always slow in knowing what to do with new tech. What does government need to do to protect us?
I don't think government can protect you from this. I think that there are things that governments can do to at least increase transparency and perhaps slow down, I guess, the infusion of these things into very questionable contexts, basically persecuting scam stuff, but that's not so far off from what it's doing today. I mean, but if you look at, governments have given us the little accept all cookies buttons that you get on every website these days, and I don't think most people think that that has done all that much in the way of helping us. I think that there does need to be a conversation, but the idea, part of the issue is that the idea of government regulation assumes that we collectively do have the agency to make the changes that need to be made. And the whole point of my book is that our ability of control is limited. So I think government's role is ideally probably going to be to coordinate between tech companies and act as a good faith broker, so that one company doesn't feel like it's giving up the store by releasing some of its data. So I think there's a role for government to play, but I don't think we can look to them to save us any more than we can look to Facebook.
Follow up to that is on TV, we are warned that a show has violence and coarse language. Could we be warned that what we are seeing or using has come from AI? I suspect that touches on your idea that we could have some kind of trust component or reputational component attached to media going forward.
Yeah, there's two aspects of that. One is, can a respectable company just say, hey, this was messed with by us? And I'm sure that, any respectable AI company is going to do that. They're already putting in as many, I'm sure after that law case came in, they were tripping over themselves to add in a note that this is not supposed to be used in a court of law. I mean, they're very good. They're definitely going to hedge as much as possible. The other issue, though, is what about, what a gray market AIs or whatever you want to call it, where there's an intent to deceive, or at least it's unclear. And in that case, that's why I think you want to build out trust networks of some sort or another to sort of try to sort of make an assurance on an exclusive set of content, to say, okay, this stuff at least is trustworthy. I don't know. I sometimes I wonder if it'll be a good thing, since I think people are already too credulous of what they read online. So maybe if things become so grotesquely unreliable, we'll actually have more skepticism.
I worry that, if you follow the New York Times, when they make a mistake, they come out and say, well, we've made a mistake, or the Wall Street Journal would print a retraction. I don't think that if you're already knee deep, as you point out, into your own political echo chamber, I can see stuff like this Drudge Report style. Nothing's going to come along to correct it, and even if it did, it wouldn't change the fundamental interaction with the information. I think it's the.
But I mean, in some ways, we're already there.
Yeah.
Humans are producing unreliable content. So, is it going to be so much worse? The issue, I think, comes from when you have, I think, like videos or things that are going to be taken as prima facie true, and that's and people realize it, and people don't realize that, oh, okay, this isn't even, but in some ways, and this is something I do get into the book, there's already such a glut of information out there online that you can pick your narrative already and find something to support it.
Yeah.
It's not as though the standard of discourse is especially high right now. So the question is, where is AI going to exacerbate that? And I think that it's in terms of video content that you're going to see it the most.
I have another question here. What is your opinion on how AI or even LLM should be incorporated into the current elementary school curriculum? Should it be used as a tool or as preparation for their downstream schooling or critical thinking?
Oh, I don't see. I mean, it will be used for standardized testing. But in terms of, if you believe that education requires, I think, a decent amount of a relationship between teachers and students, I don't think that there's that great of a role for it, especially at the elementary school level, because what you're teaching them, so much of what you're teaching them there is soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a huge role for it, honestly, beyond, I guess, large scale sort of assessments of schools, and their administrative purposes. But in the classroom, I'm not. Offhand, I don't see great uses for it, simply because the things that it's good at aren't particularly things that we have cause for in elementary school as it is.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that of my own? And that is that there's been a real panic that students, especially older students, are going to start I think they already have started
Yeah,
leveraging ChatGPT to write
yeah,
essays and things like that.
yeah.
How do you think schools should respond to that? That's going to be, I mean, that's got to be playing like whack-a-mole if you're trying to figure out who's used ChatGPT and or whatever else is coming down the pipe and
Yeah,
written an essay.
yeah. I sort of have a big picture thing here, which is that the more you expect students to behave like robots, the more ChatGPT is going to be a problem. If you put a student up in front of an examination board and give them an oral exam, ChatGPT is not really going to help them.
Mm.
Uh, it's only because we've been trying to sort of increase efficiency and automate the process of education that ChatGPT is indeed so effective. So, what do you do? Well, you put them in situations in which ChatGPT is likely to fall down. I mean, literally, I mean, ask a student what they meant by parts of their paper. You're going to figure out pretty quickly, right, whether or not they wrote it. Now, you could have a case where, oh, they understand the material and they do understand the material and they understand the paper. Well, in that case, okay. I mean,
I mean,
they
technically,
learned it, right?
they fulfilled the
So,
education purpose,
yeah,
basically.
exactly. So, you know, it's I think the thing is that there's a larger problem in higher education in particular, in which for the last few decades, the people doing the labor of teaching and grading are paid like absurdly low wages and are not going to be especially thrilled with the idea of having to do even more work. So I think it's actually more symptomatic than it is a novel problem, and that it's saying that, okay, well, if you're charging tens of thousands of dollars to be taught by someone who's getting, $5,000 per class to teach, dozens of students, what do you expect? How much can you expect from this person? If you throw a lot of money at the problem, you can certainly find out when a student actually knows the material or not. I have no doubt about that. So you're asking me, oh, how can we automate the process without making it vulnerable to the students automating the process? Well, gee,
That's good. But you know what, though? It's kind of
imagine that.
encouraging.
What?
It's kind of encouraging, though, because it seems that the response to worrying about a lot of this stuff is, well, what you need is more human stuff, basically. I mean, if we've spent the last 50 years trying to reduce costs and standardize things to the point where we don't have to think about what we're doing, then the solution is simple: standardize less of it and
Well,
go back to, I mean, maybe it's not easy, but it doesn't tell you that the problem is insurmountable. It's not
no,
as
no, it's just a matter of where the money is going to come
yeah.
from. And I can't tell you. I mean, well, like I said, I think that higher education is facing a day, has been long facing a day of reckoning, and this is one more log on the pile. But
David, I'm going to let this be our last question since no other questions have come in. I do appreciate that you've given us a full hour here today.
of
The
course,
last question is: could AI be used to control AI?
well, uh, well, so two answers. One is AI is the only thing that can control AI, or at least humans can't control AI. We do indeed look to AI. The problem is that, as the question itself suggests, is something of an infinite regress. When you're trying to control AI, you're saying, okay, well, how can I validate that AI is behaving in a correct manner? Great. Now, how can you validate if you clone the watchman to watch himself, how do you know that the clone is doing the right job? The issue is that we now have systems that are too big for humans to police, and uh, and and we can't rely on the systems that are big enough. So I think, you know, on a small scale, certainly you could deploy AI in sort of adversarial context. So there are use cases in which you can sort of deploy AI to sort of check on other AI, but in the broader sense, you are begging the question, and that you're saying, okay, how can we make a system that can make sure that the exact same system doesn't misbehave? And it's like, well, yeah. So, so as a tactic, it's it's usable, but the underlying problem can't be fixed by it precisely because what you're trying to do is to have a system validate itself. Yeah. So yes and no, but in the broader sense, no.
Well, it's been an hour on the nose. I really appreciate your time. I want to remind everyone the book is Meganets, and it is available obviously in bookstores as well as on Amazon. I've enjoyed reading it, and I hope everyone that watches this enjoyed our conversation as much as I have.
Yeah,
And
you can read my comments on ChatGPT actually on my Substack, which is Our Stack, AUERSTACK. It's a pun.
I will add that to the email I send out to everybody and put it in the
Okay.
comments for the YouTube video. But anyhow, David, thank you very much. Much
Thanks for
appreciated.
having
Thank
me.
you everyone for attending. Cheers.